Hello, welcome back to an episode of The Grind. I know I meant to act like I'm someone and this matters and I'm cool, and instead I'm just wearing the same dirty shirt I've been wearing all day. My hands are cut up from the spare tire I had to put on the other day. Can I just be a guy who likes fantasy football and does some stuff that's a little obsessive in terms of researching it, and you might find it interesting? Can we just do that instead of pretending to be a YouTube star? That'd be great. Because that's what I'm going to do. Listen, mostly for Patreons, I guess, because I got a lot of questions about something that I posted on there recently. Most of my Patreon stuff is free. So if you want to go look at some fantasy football stats or projections, some of it's Patreon only behind the mega wall of $1 a month, or it's posted on my Twitter at Pahowdy. So if you're interested, you can check it out there. I'm going to talk about one specific thing that I was trying to do. I inserted it into my DFS sheet. Disclaimer: just a guy, especially in DFS. I play alone because I'm just obsessed with fantasy football, but I don't claim to even know my win rate or what. I play mostly cash with some GPPs. I guess I know those terms, but this isn't meant to be some miracle cure or anything like that. I was just looking for a way of adjusting for matchups that I could keep track of that made sense to me. And what I came up last year was adjusted target share allowed instead of looking at fantasy points, because 4for4's already got a pretty killer adjusted fantasy point stats. Now, just in case you're not statistically inclined or you haven't seen me before talking about matchup stats, they're all trash. Because if you're trying to project a weekly outcome, like our yearly outcomes, our seasonal outcomes, where 40% is explainable by last year's stats to a 40% tune of R squared. Listen, that's as good as we get in fantasy football in this small sample size game in terms of football. And they're trash, right? Like, they hit at 55 or 60% rate. Week to week, imagine trash is trash, right? So that's partly why matchup stats are all difficult and non-predictive and non-sticky. But with DFS, you've got smart people to lay out matchups. And so I was just looking for some kind of my own context, because I like to track my own things. With DFS, most of that stuff is deeply buried behind mega paywalls, right? So I don't have it. And also, I don't agree with some of the philosophy. They believe in matchup stats way too much just for the nerdiness that's in my heart. Like, dudes, come on. But what you got to do? You've got to judge the matchup some way, and we're not mega NFL geniuses or anything, so let's matchup stats, shall we? So, again, what I came up with is using a lot of research done by DFS grinders and all those podcasts, and also something to track for myself. I was just thinking about, instead of points, like volume. Like, defenses may allow more volume more often to certain positions. Maybe, or at least we'd have to track it to find out. So I started just trying to work one out last year, and adjusted target share allowed is what I've come up with. I've only really just started finalizing what it is, so I certainly don't have a history of it. I don't know how useful it is, but it gives me some context, at least, to all the smarter discussion around DFS and individual matchups, and that's what it is. So let me show you something of this is a table I posted that made everyone scratch their heads and start wondering what any of it meant, because I've come up with all the abbreviations myself, which is why it doesn't make sense. This screen isn't going to work, is it? Let me go full nerd on you here. Alright, so what are you looking at here? Basically, you're looking at a table with the teams and the teams that they're facing. So the DSTs, because I'm a fantasy player, and that's what I always think of as the abbreviation for defense and special teams, even though we're just thinking about the defense here. Again, I'm not a matchup stat guy. And then the opponent. So this is a team we're interested in. Say New England is going up against Miami. Is that this week's schedule? I think it is. I think I've got this week's schedule in here, this year's schedule in here, and it's set for week 1. So yeah, I think I'm pretty confident that New England's facing Miami this week. Awesome. All right, so what's all the rest of this stuff? Well, for a start, all these tabs down here I didn't include. It's basically what's feeding things that are feeding this. So I'm going to take you through briefly just what's in the table instead of daunting you with, what an obsessive guy I am to have all these tabs just to make this simple table. So, all right. What have we got here? First off, I've got the position column. So I'm doing it for all offensive positions, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and running back. And also note that I'm using the scoring for the whole position group from individual teams and against individual teams. So this isn't just Julian Edelman's stats or, Kenny Galladay's stats or Allen Robinson's stats. This is the whole position group, okay? Okay, so first column right here is PPR points allowed, and it's all in PPR points because that's just my default. So here, all it's looking up is the average PPR points that were scored against Miami for the weeks that I have included. And right now, where it's just the start of 2020, I have all of 2019 points in here. All these stats were dragged from 4for4.com. They count stats a little bit differently, and they don't count throwaways, or there's some weird way that they count it, so it's not the exact numbers that you'll find on like Pro Football Reference, but I trust 4for4 well enough that they're good stats, so I'm rolling with it. So since I'm using all of 2019 data here, this is the average points, you see it's got an average formula in here, scored against Miami by wide receivers in 2019. That's what this column is. As 2020 progresses, I'll convert this to purely what's happened in 2020, right? But for now, I'm just taking a look at last year. Second column is target share allowed. So instead of looking at, that's why it's in red. You see, I tried to color code it, and I already made a mistake myself. So I understand why this sheet can be confusing. But yeah, red columns are about the defense. Green columns are about the offense, the skill position players we're interested in this week. Alright, so target share allowed is the same as PPR points allowed, but targets, right? I've got it dragging from this tab over here that we'll see in a second. This is the average target share thrown to this position group, in this case it's a wide receiver, against Miami in 2019. So that's all it is. 63% of targets when facing Miami as a defense went to wide receivers. Is that high or low? Well, that's why I've got these averages in over here. You see the league average is around 58%. So 63% is slightly above average, right? So we know that apparently, on average, teams facing Miami targeted their wide receivers at a higher than league average clip. Is it drastically different? Well, that's one of the reasons that I've made these two funny numbers over here, and we'll get to it. Third column here is opponent's target share average. That's the green column right here. So this is the average amount that in 2019 New England threw to wide receivers. So 62% of their targets, all their targets in all of 2019 went to wide receivers for New England. Now that's just to provide this number a little context, right? Because if they're throwing at 63% to their wide receivers and Miami's accepting or creating or allowing on average 63% of targets to go to the wide receivers, then there's not much difference here. We shouldn't, if we're just basing it on these two little matchup stats, expect a drastic difference to any type of game plan, which for New England might be interesting since New England tends to game script to its opponent more than most teams. So here there's not a drastic need for them to game script away what they typically do. I guess that would be one form of analysis, right? Alright, the next section here, it's all under this banner of last 5 weeks. Now again, where I only have 2019 data so far, this is just the last 5 weeks, so week 11 to week 16 in 2019. So one thing this is trying to show is the difference on average to over the last 5 matchups. Because while I hate breaking things down into splits, that's essentially what you're trying to do with a matchup stat anyway. To look at a smaller sample to see if there's any drastic change in the offense or that the defense perhaps causes. And so five examples is okay, I guess, as a split. But, you know, it kind of sucks that it is a split. But anyway. So again, this is target share allowed and fantasy points allowed this time. Fantasy points and target share for average for the whole of 2019 and over the last 5 weeks. So you see there's barely any change. Actually, these are the same. Okay, so the average, I might have to fix that average. It's dragging the whole average. But anyway, target share allowed is working here, so I'll fix this one. So you can see over the last 5 weeks, New England, Miami actually accepted a much higher rate of targets at their wide receivers over the last 5 weeks of 2019 than they were on average for the whole season. Now, this is where typical adjustment stats look at the strength of schedule, and these are usually strength of schedule stats, and that's just not the way that it works in my head. That wasn't what I was interested in, doing some arbitrary, well, this is a good team, that's why that happened, or this is a good wide receiver. All definitions for that, while they seem very obvious in individual examples, well, it's Allen Robinson, he's good, but he wasn't good last week, and it just seems data-terrily, if I can make up a word, a little arbitrary, so I wasn't interested in doing that. Again, I put in the league average just for some context to what's going on over those last 5 weeks, so you can see that 70% rate is significantly higher than what's happening for most teams on a week-to-week basis. Again, don't fall into the fallacy of the average. This means that this isn't the true number for any team. It's just giving you an average. So just keep in mind what an average is. It can be a lot higher, can be a lot lower on a week-to-week basis, right? For any team. All right, and I've also got the average PPR points again for context. All right, so green column. So we're back to looking at the offense, the skill guys that we're interested in, and we're specifically looking at wide receivers, but we could scroll down and look at tight ends or running backs because I'm doing it for all of them. Anyway, so opposing average position fantasy points. Okay, so that's the average number of fantasy points that wide receivers were scoring for New England over the last 5 weeks. I know it's a weird column, but it's a very simple number, right? Over the last 5 weeks, in the data, in this case, week 11 to week 16, New England wide receivers were accounting for 35 fantasy points on average. This is also the target share that the wide receivers were averaging over the last 5 weeks. So you can see they actually decreased as the season got older, which is actually fairly common for a winning team as they start throwing less and less in general if they have more and more wrapped up. But anyway, alright, so that's what all these columns mean. They might look fancy, they might sound bad because I'm bad at abbreviations, but they're all fairly simple numbers. And again, it just gives me an idea of the matchup. Now, these two is where I'm trying to get creative, which is always where things go wrong. Like I said, 4for4 has a great adjusted fantasy points allowed. I really recommend just using them. But while I was here, I thought, why not take a look? So all I'm doing is over the last 5 weeks, I'm averaging the change in fantasy points scoring for that position group against that defense. So this isn't the strength of schedule or anything like that. It's just, of the 5 teams that faced Miami in those last 5 weeks, on average, the fantasy points scored by wide receivers compared to the team average over those 5 weeks was about 10 points higher. You see how that's different than strength of schedule? I'm not even interested in the individual matchups or the players. I'm saying, what was the change while facing Miami, or the average change while facing Miami over those 5 weeks? The same thing is true of target share. What this number is saying is that over the last 5 matchups, wide receivers facing Miami, and you can see it's definitely dragging the defense. So while facing Miami, the average target share to the wide receivers for those 5 opponents was on average, again, average is a really tricky number. It doesn't tell you much. It tells you exactly what isn't. But it gives you, the median, literally the middle number between all the other numbers. And average is over-exaggerated for its description, but there you go. Anyway, while facing Miami over the last 5 weeks, their opponents' average target share was around 8% higher for wide receivers. Now, that's not every matchup. There'll be some teams in the average actually targeted wide receivers significantly less than their own average while facing Miami. Otherwise, this would be much higher, right? Even though this is the highest adjustment. What it's saying is that compared to all the other teams in their last 5 matchups, the average is higher, which means there is a great deal of more adjustment while facing Miami towards the wide receiver position. All right. Now, I don't know. I think I've explained what it is, but I'm a visual guy, so let's go look at this tab here. You can see that it's dragging it from, let's see, the Z column. And I can adjust it. As you can see, I've got these little things over here, so I can adjust the schedule. I can adjust which week to look up so that when I get 2020 data in here, I don't have to do a lot of revamping. I can just say week 1, 2020 instead of looking up week 16. Anyway, these are just my things, but still. All right, so yeah, let's just focus on adjusted target share, or the adjusting of target share. I've got to come up with a better name for this. For their opponents against Miami over here. So here is the column where most of this, or the tab where most of this stuff is getting pulled from. I'm pulling it from individual 4for4 tabs, or tabs that I've downloaded from 4for4, just to be really clear, and it broke. Oh, okay, we're back. So yeah, I'm just pulling it all into one sheet so I can physically see it all, line it up, and put it in the right order, because again, I'm very visual. So, alright, over here I've got some helper columns, don't worry about them, that's just for the table we were just looking at. This is a team, this is defense, right? So we're interested in teams that faced Miami, and where it's only pulling the last 5 weeks, we're interested in weeks. We could look at the whole season, but defenses change over the course of a season, and definitely change year over year. So we're looking at week 11 to week 16 in that table. So what happened? Well, they faced Buffalo, Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York Giants, and Cincinnati, okay? And we're primarily interested in the wide receiver because, that's the number we've got in our head, right? This 8%. Now, we also know the number for tight end and running back, but, we're just looking at one at the moment. All right, so, where am I? Buffalo, in week 11, targeted the wide receiver at a 79% clip. The team's average was 68%. Over their last 5 weeks in different matchups with different defenses to worry about. That created a 10% change while facing Miami. Now you can see how that by itself doesn't tell you much. I mean, that's just what Miami did, and there's an individual game script going on there. And that might be why this particular adjustment stat is just trash and doesn't mean anything. Just trash, kid. Or the average could be helping us out by explaining what happens most often while facing Miami most recently. That's my hope. So, if we look at what happened to Cleveland targeted their wide receivers 1% more than usual, which is barely anything, so it would have kept it at the average. But Philadelphia, who normally target their tight ends 14% higher, actually chose to target their wide receivers 14% higher. And again, looking at a smaller sample size, and this would be worth looking into, is in week 13, was Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert just injured? Were they kicked off the field? Was there some other reason that they targeted their wide receivers at such a drastic clip? That would be putting a lot more and better context around these two numbers. But where I want to look at all teams and all positions all the time, I can't really fit in that many columns or, have a man to go research every box for me. And even though I don't sleep, I don't have all the time in the world. So instead, I'm just having to trust the average here. Now, unless the same happened for Philadelphia and New York, both of them stopped targeting their tight end at, 10% or close to it, or over, in the case of Philadelphia, compared to their own average while facing Miami, and instead they chose to focus on the wide receiver. So these two games, and Buffalo in week 11, really create this 8% number. And where we're taking 5 examples, I'm pretty confident that not all of their tight ends got injured coincidentally when they faced Miami, right? So in this instance, I think that number's fairly solid. Over the last 5 weeks, teams found it easier to target wide receivers than tight ends against Miami. Or maybe facing Miami was so easy that they were just throwing to wide receivers because it's more fun. I don't know, okay? But whatever story you want to make around it, this number seems to be true, even though you've got, the potential that we had a lot of injured players in this week. But how about this week and also this week? That seems unlikely. So you can also put error bars around this quite easily in your head. Like if it's below 4%, this adjustment probably doesn't mean much because it doesn't take much more than one game to create an above average change, right? But when you're looking at Miami and Chicago and even Detroit, teams did, over the last 5 weeks of 2019, seem to lean on their wide receivers a little more heavily than their own average. And that means that if we were to believe the defenses were exactly the same, which we definitely should not, we could feel pretty confident if we're going to make a contrarian bet somewhere in a contest lineup somewhere that New England, Detroit, or Chicago wide receivers might get a little more targets than we would expect typically because they are facing Miami. Or, sorry, wide receivers facing Miami, Chicago, and Detroit. You see, I got confused there as well. Anyway, but that's what I'm trying to do with this column. If that sounds like bunkum to you, me too, frankly. All matchup stats sound like a desperation play because we can't find anything real to bet on and stories get old. I agree. But it's at least based on data. It is based on a 5-game sample. For right now, where it's only using 2019 data, I would be real hesitant. Unless you're really big into IDP or you know Tom Kislingberry and you've listened to him a lot about the Miami defense, so you know a lot more about how likely they are to be the same or different. That's where guys like Tom would thrive on matchup stats. Like, you should really be listening. We should, if we're interested in defense-adjusted matchup stats, those are the guys we should be listening to because they can tell us a lot more about if this number is going to stay steady or not, because they know about the cornerbacks, the linebackers, how the unit gels. Those would be the guys that would give us more and girls information about whether these stats are more or less likely to go up or down based on what's happened to the defense in the offseason. I'm not an IDP guy, I don't know. So for me, it's just kind of a wait and see to how these numbers start adjusting over the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. And then I'll start heavily really trying to look at this and see if it's helping me assess matchups. But anyway, this video is really just about the process of developing it, and because even though I put little descriptions in here, most people were really confused about what this number means. So again, this is the average change in target share for teams facing Miami over the last 5 weeks in 2019. It's just the average change in target share for their opponents while facing that defense. So I'm not adjusting by schedule or a particular player or a result of the game, just what actually happened for those players facing that defense. On average, their numbers went up for Miami or they went down for when you were facing Atlanta, for example. Wow, that's interesting, actually. Teams targeted their wide receivers about 8% less while facing Atlanta, which is kind of odd when you consider how much they throw the ball. That would lead to a pass-happy game script, so on and so forth. So let's go just real quick. What's going on here? They faced Carolina, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Carolina again. Wow. San Francisco and Jacksonville, or, the Jags. Let's see their changes. Yeah, man, New Orleans really targeted all their players a lot less than average. What's that about? Sorry, this was meant to be a quick video, but now I'm fascinated. Okay, so they targeted the wide receiver 39, 28, 32. Does that equal 100? Yeah, and this equals 100, so the numbers are right. What's happening here? No one got targeted more? How's that possible? 39, 28. Oh, they targeted the tight end more. Targets went to the tight end for New Orleans. How many targets was that, though? Just 12 targets, but still, that's a lot. It must have been a Jared Cook week or something. Right? That's fantasy points, if you're wondering, by the way. Yeah. Wow. Sorry, I'm doing a video. I forgot. Yeah, look, here it is. Sorry, I was looking for the right column. They targeted the tight end instead, 10% higher than usual facing Atlanta. Interesting enough, so did Jacksonville, San Francisco, and that's a lot because San Francisco was targeting Kittle at a lot higher clip than average, and so to go 19% higher than they typically do, wow, over the last 5 weeks, especially these weeks here, there was a significant change. I mean, again, we're in 2020 now. The defense is entirely different. This could have just been an end of the season thing. Again, make up a story, but yeah, it does seem true when you look at the individual matchups of the last 5 weeks. Teams were targeting their wide receivers a lot less against Atlanta, which is not something I would ordinarily expect, right? Which is different. It's different than a fantasy points adjustment. And you can see that they're facing Atlanta. Teams targeted their tight ends 7% higher on average. Huh. They even targeted their running backs a little bit more while facing Atlanta. Anyway, that's what the table is for. And I really think right now, going into 2020, it's of minimal use because matchup stats are... where am I? They're difficult in general, just because you're shrinking something that's already... Players get the ball so little, relatively speaking, to a statistical sample size, that it's all a small sample game, and then you're going to shrink it to just 5 games, where a guy can be ill, or a weird game script happens, or it's the end of the season. So it's difficult, right? But when looking for very small edges of a very smart people playing a game like DFS, that's all weekly start-sit decisions, frankly. And that's why we start having to rely on, more tenuous stats. And that's why there's repeated edge on relying on good players. That's why the trope of start your studs comes from, because you don't want to have that feeling. But if you apply decent knowledge of the game, the players, or the situation week to week, and have a little bit knowledge of what's happened, as well as we can say recently against that defense or for that offense, which is what I'm trying to do with this sheet, then you can beat the average, right? You can beat the hopelessness of unpredicted stats. Hopefully, that's the point of the sheet, right? I'm trying to start to track this to see if it's any use above or below 50% rate. So whether I have actually made, or this is something that's actually useful on a week-to-week basis, or not, if it's just another week-to-week stat that we should mostly ignore as a split stat. But I'm trying my best. As you can see, it's very simple, even though it sounds complicated in abbreviation form. But the logic of it is real simple, because it's me. And it's got a lot behind it. It's not just plucked out the air by this guy's good, this guy's bad. It's literally based on the things that happened on the field. And that's me, man. That's kind of the stats I like. Simple and reality-based, not judgment-based. Anyway. I'm trying to make it sound cool. It's not. It's a statistic. Come on. But that's target share lag, guys. I got a lot of questions. Well, I got one question repeatedly about it, which was, what is that? Hopefully, I've explained it a little bit. I'm going to get out of here. Hope you enjoyed the video, or maybe the stat. I don't know. And I'll talk to you again next time. Thanks for checking it out. I'm out. I need some sleep. Okay? I need it. Maybe a little bit. I'm not going to sleep. Bye.